Well, as we celebrate 100 years of Indian cinema, there is much that we can celebrate. The fact is that today our films have reached a level of maturity that is quite remarkable. If you look at the recent films that have been made, all genres of films are being made. So for every Dabang, you also have a Zindagi Na Milegi Dobara. You also have a Gangs of Wasipur. You have Kahani. You have Vicky Donor. You have Dirty Picture. There's a whole range, Pan Singh Tomar, a whole range of films that are being made that do not necessarily cater to the lowest common denominator and are raising the bar of where Hindi cinema is today, which I find very welcoming. I think in the portrayal of women, there has definitely been a change, because if you look at the earlier films of the 60s, for instance, and you have a Meena Kumari film which became very successful, Main Chup Rahungi, I Will Remain Silent was considered a virtue for women. Today it no longer is so. There was a period when we were sort of struggling to make the woman a little more empowered, but hadn't really come to terms with what it is that this empowered woman is. And so we struggled and we made films like Zakhmi Aurat and Insaf Ki Devi, but first we had Rambos and then we have Rambolinas, because they weren't anything about the complexity of a woman. Today, that was left to the realm of the parallel cinema. Today, even within the mainstream cinema, you can see that working women who were earlier completely invisible are now being seen. And the woman, even though she has a smaller role, is still playing, well, a substantial part, even if it is not big in length. But there is a lot that leaves to be desired. I think so. Also the fact that it is now being peopled by the young and they think differently, and that is being reflected in the movies. Films take from life and life takes from film sometimes, so it's very difficult to draw the line of where exactly that happens. But yes, I think the fact that we are poised on the brink of change and such a huge upheaval is happening in our society is certainly fodder for a good script and good film. Yes and no. I think we have much to offer. We are the only cinema in the world that has managed to withstand the onslaught of Hollywood. We make twice the number of films that Hollywood does. We really prefer our films to any other films in the world, and we have a huge audience in the world. I confess that it's largely in the diaspora, but definitely interest in Indian cinema is increasing. And interestingly, it is increasing because there's a lot of curiosity about Bollywood. The song and dance bit that earlier was looked down upon is suddenly now being celebrated because we are recognizing that it is our USP. We tell tales with songs and dances. So there is a lot that we have now learned, but I think there's a lot left to be desired, because although technically I think we are very good, I still think that in the department of script there is a lot that can be done. A lot of people ask whether the parallel cinema has disappeared, and I disagree with that, because actually it hasn't disappeared at all. It's taken on a new avatar. Because if you look at the independent films that are being made, they're doing the same thing. They're not catering to the lowest common denominator. They are making films that are away from the formula and trying to say, tell different stories, and are doing so successfully. But this independent film is made by an urban, Western, educated, English-speaking young person who is reflecting her reality or his reality, which is inevitable, because after all, there are so many contradictions that India lives with, and it's nice that we are able to see all of them. So it hasn't disappeared, it's just taken on a new avatar of the independent cinema, and people like Anurag Kashyap, for instance, are really the cutting edge of that parallel cinema. I find it very interesting to work with first-time directors, and in my career, I think I've worked with the maximum number of first-time directors, starting from Shekhar Kapoor and Shyam Benegal also. It was his first film, as it was mine. I think there's something about the passion and the energy of the first-time filmmaker that I find very contagious and very invigorating. But really it is on an instinctive sort of understanding of whether the director is going to be able to hold the script that I make the choice, and so far I haven't been disappointed. Actually, my activism is not separate from my art, because the concerns that I have and the worldview that I have, because of being born in a certain kind of family and because of the fact that my parents always believed that art should be used as an instrument for change, and that's the kind of atmosphere I grew up. So it was inevitable that I would try and use my art for the purpose of social change, because that's what I grew up with. So I don't treat my activism as separate. I use whatever medium I have at my disposal to say the same things. Sometimes it's through activism, sometimes it's through being able to tell the story of the disempowered and the dispossessed, and tell the story of their ability to transform themselves and look at change. So no, there hasn't been, there isn't a great dichotomy between those two.